Haiti, a failed state. Introduction. Haiti, once celebrated as the world's first Black republic, has now tragically come to symbolize the total breakdown of statehood. Decades of foreign interference, natural disasters, corrupt leadership, and systemic poverty have eroded the nation's core institutions. By 2025, Haiti is widely regarded as a failed state, a country in which the government no longer controls its territory, provides basic services, or ensures the safety of its people. Collapse of central authority. The 2021 assassination of President Jovenel Moïse was a watershed moment in the country's decline. Since then, Haiti has failed to hold national elections, and successive transitional authorities have lacked both legitimacy and capacity. Parliament is defunct, and key public offices remain vacant. The judiciary, plagued by intimidation and under-resourcing, cannot function effectively. Executive power, such as it is, operates from isolated compounds under heavy guard. There is no social contract left between the state and its citizens. Government services are minimal or non-existent. The police are outgunned and demoralized, and no credible national leadership has emerged to unify the country or restore confidence. Gangs as de facto rulers. Today, heavily armed criminal gangs control over 80% of Port-au-Prince and large stretches of major transport routes. Gangs like G9 and 400 Mawozo have evolved from street-level militias into warlord-style organizations with sophisticated weapons, funding, and territorial control. In many areas, they impose curfews, collect taxes, and mete out brutal justice, in effect replacing the state. Kidnappings, extortion, and massacres have become routine. Over 20,500 people were killed in gang-related violence in 2024 alone. The Haitian National Police, severely under-equipped, have largely retreated or been co-opted. Vigilante justice movements such as Bois Calais briefly emerged in 2023, but have since either dissipated or contributed further to the cycle of violence. Economic and humanitarian collapse. Haiti's economic base has crumbled. The country is now dependent on international aid and remittances, with formal employment virtually non-existent. Inflation remains above 40%. Food prices have soared, and the local currency has depreciated to near worthlessness. Fuel shortages and supply chain breakdowns have paralyzed transport and commerce. Humanitarian conditions are catastrophic. The United Nations estimates that nearly half the population faces acute food insecurity. Hospitals lack medicines, clean water is scarce, and cholera has reemerged. Children are out of school, and tens of thousands of people are internally displaced, many sheltering in makeshift camps or churches. International paralysis and the Kenyan-led mission. The international response has been slow and fragmented. In 2023, the UN Security Council approved a multinational support mission led by Kenya, but deployment has been delayed due to legal and logistical challenges. Meanwhile, regional bodies like CARICOM have failed to broker a viable political solution. The United States and European Union have focused primarily on halting migration rather than addressing root causes. Aid workers and diplomats alike operate under severe risk. Humanitarian corridors are often inaccessible, and NGOs face extortion or targeted violence. The vacuum has prompted fears that Haiti could become a regional hub for arms trafficking, narcotics, and human smuggling. Conclusion. Haiti's descent into state failure is not the result of a single crisis, but a prolonged process of erosion, exacerbated by natural disasters, predatory elites, and international negligence. The result is a nation stripped of sovereignty, governed in practice by criminal gangs, and abandoned by much of the world. Any path to recovery will require not only security guarantees and international coordination, but also a long overdue reckoning with the structures of impunity and foreign exploitation that have haunted Haiti since its birth. References: 1. Human Rights Watch. Haiti, Gangs Tighten Grip Amid State Collapse, 2024. 2. UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, Haiti Situation Report, Jan 2025. 3. World Bank. Haiti Economic Update, November 2024. 4. United Nations World Food Program, WFP, Haiti Food Security Brief, 2024. 5. UN Security Council Resolution 2699, 2023. Sudan, a country torn by war and economic doom, by Aslan Adnan, published May 25. Abstract. Sudan, once a regional power in northeastern Africa, now faces systemic collapse under the weight of a brutal civil war and complete economic disintegration. With state institutions in ruins and millions displaced, Sudan represents one of the gravest humanitarian and geopolitical crises of the decade. This article provides a comprehensive examination of Sudan's descent into failed statehood, assessing the war's origins, economic implosion, and the rapidly deteriorating humanitarian situation. Sta 1. Introduction. Sudan's long and turbulent history, from colonial legacies to military rule, has entered a new and catastrophic phase. Since the eruption of war in April 2023 between the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, and the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF, the country has ceased to function as a coherent state. The conflict has engulfed major urban centers and rural regions alike, with a death toll in the tens of thousands and over 8 million people displaced, making it the largest internal displacement crisis in the world. 2. The war that shattered Sudan. The current war is rooted in Sudan's failed democratic transition, following the overthrow of Omar al-Bashir in 2019. Although a transitional civilian government briefly emerged, it was toppled by a military coup in 2021. Tensions between SAF leader General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and RSF commander Mohamed Hemeti Dagalo escalated into open warfare in 2023, turning Khartoum into a battleground. Today, no side has prevailed. Entire regions have splintered under warlord control. Both factions have been implicated in gross human rights abuses, including ethnic cleansing in West Darfur, mass sexual violence, extrajudicial killings, and deliberate attacks on civilians. Efforts at mediation by the African Union, IGAD, and the United Nations have failed to yield a ceasefire. Economic collapse beyond repair. Sudan's economy has collapsed. Inflation is uncontrollable, the Sudanese pound is worthless, and food insecurity is at record levels. Agricultural production, the backbone of rural livelihoods, has been halted by conflict, and commercial activity has ground to a standstill. Oil revenues disappeared with the 2011 secession of South Sudan, and international aid and investment have largely evaporated. According to the World Bank, 2024, more than 80% of Sudan's population now lives below the poverty line. Salaries for public servants are unpaid, fuel and electricity are unavailable in most regions, and informal markets dominate survival. 4. Humanitarian catastrophe. Sudan's humanitarian emergency is among the worst globally. According to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, 8.4 million people have been displaced internally and across borders. Refugees have streamed into Chad, South Sudan, and Egypt, straining fragile host economies and worsening regional instability. Famine conditions are emerging across central and western Sudan, with Darfur particularly affected. Nearly 19 million people face acute food insecurity. Hospitals have been bombed or looted, with over 70% of health facilities now non-operational. Diseases such as cholera and measles are surging unchecked, and humanitarian access remains perilously limited due to insecurity and the obstruction of aid convoys. 5. A fragmented and failed state. What remains of Sudan is a fragmented landscape of militia-controlled zones, destroyed infrastructure, and vanishing governance. Traditional state functions, law enforcement, education, public health, and civil administration have ceased to exist. The SAF and RSF now act less like national institutions than rival cartels competing for territorial dominance. With the central government effectively absent and no prospects of democratic restoration in sight, Sudan has reached a point of systemic failure. The absence of a coherent peace process, continued arms inflows from regional backers, and the international community's fragmented response all contribute to the consolidation of this collapse. Conclusion. Sudan's implosion represents a tragic convergence of unrestrained militarism, international neglect, and the long shadow of authoritarian rule. The war between the SAF and RSF has not only shattered the state, but has also plunged millions into a cycle of suffering and hopelessness. Without sustained, coordinated international action, both diplomatic and humanitarian, Sudan may not recover for generations. The longer the war rages, the deeper the scars will run, not only for Sudan's traumatized population, but for the security of the entire region. References: 1. UN Human Rights Council, Report on Human Rights Violations in Sudan, 2024. 2. World Bank, Sudan Economic Monitor, December 2024. 3. UN OCHA, Sudan Humanitarian Needs Overview, March 2025. 4. Médecins Sans Frontières, Emergency Briefing on Sudan, February 2025. 5. African Center for Justice and Peace Studies, Documenting Atrocities in Darfur, 2024. Ukraine, Avoidable War and Economic Collapse Due to NATO's Misguided Eastward Expansion, by Aslan Adnan, M.A., published May 2025. The war in Ukraine, now in its third year, has devastated the nation's economy, fractured its society, and shaken the foundations of European security. What began as a conflict over territorial sovereignty has evolved into a geopolitical quagmire, one that could arguably have been prevented. At the heart of the tragedy lies NATO's long-standing eastward expansion and its misreading of post-Soviet Russia's security anxieties. Seeds of conflict, a predictable blowback. The roots of the Ukraine conflict lie not merely in Russia's 2022 invasion, but in decades of strategic miscalculation. Since the 1990s, NATO has expanded steadily eastward, incorporating former Warsaw Pact states and ex-Soviet republics, despite assurances, albeit informal, made to Moscow during the collapse of the Soviet Union. For Russia, Ukraine was always a red line, a country historically, culturally, and strategically tied to Russia, with Crimea home to its vital Black Sea Fleet. While NATO maintained that every nation has the sovereign right to choose its alliances, this stance ignored Russia's deep-seated fear of encirclement. The 2008 Bucharest summit, which declared Ukraine and Georgia would eventually join NATO, sounded alarm bells in Moscow. The West's failure to seriously address these concerns made conflict, if not inevitable, tragically foreseeable. Invasion and devastation. Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022 was a flagrant violation of international law and Ukraine's sovereignty. But it also marked the collapse of post-Cold War diplomacy. Cities like Mariupol and Bakhmut became symbols of destruction, while millions of Ukrainians were displaced internally or fled abroad. The civilian death toll remains in the tens of thousands, and the war's front lines have hardened into a grim stalemate. Ukraine's infrastructure, energy grids, transport networks, and housing lies in ruins across much of the east and south. Recovery, when peace eventually comes, will require hundreds of billions of dollars and decades of effort. In the meantime, daily life remains defined by blackouts, shortages, shelling, and trauma. Economic collapse amid war economy. Ukraine's economy has shrunk by over 30% since the invasion, according to the World Bank. Entire sectors have ceased functioning. Agriculture, once Ukraine's breadbasket export engine, is now crippled by landmines, port blockades, and destroyed irrigation systems. Industrial output has collapsed. Inflation, currency depreciation, and reliance on foreign aid have made the economy precariously dependent on Western financial lifelines. The government's war expenditures far exceed its income, forcing reliance on IMF loans, EU support, and U.S. military and budgetary aid. While these flows have helped Ukraine survive, they are no substitute for a functioning domestic economy. The burden on future generations, who must one day repay this debt and rebuild the country, will be profound. NATO and the failure of deterrence. While NATO members have rallied to support Ukraine militarily, the alliance's earlier failure to create a genuine European security framework that included Russia cannot be overlooked. The post-Cold War order prioritized expansion over integration. Instead of fostering mutual security, it bred suspicion and hostility. Russia's aggression is indefensible, yet the West's role in constructing the conditions for conflict deserves critical reflection. The zero-sum mindset that viewed Eastern Europe as a prize to be pulled westward rather than a bridge to cooperative security has backfired. Dialogue was replaced with deterrence, trust with threats, and diplomacy with doctrine. Conclusion: a war that could have been averted. Ukraine's war is, above all, a human tragedy, but it is also a failure of international strategy. The conflict could perhaps have been averted with a different approach, one that respected Ukrainian sovereignty while engaging constructively with Russian fears. Instead, The post-1991 triumphalism of the West ignored the warnings of scholars and diplomats alike. Today, Ukraine suffers the consequences. So too does Europe, burdened by refugee flows, energy crises, and rising defense budgets. A lasting peace will require more than weapons. It demands honesty about the past, humility in diplomacy, and a commitment to rebuilding not only Ukraine, but the very idea of shared security in Europe. References. 1. Mearsheimer, John J. Why the Ukraine Crisis is the West's Fault. Foreign Affairs, 2014. 2. World Bank. Ukraine Economic Update, March 2025. 3. UNHCR. Ukraine Refugee Emergency, 2025. 4. NATO. Bucharest Summit Declaration, April 2008. 5. International Crisis Group. A Road to Peace in Ukraine, 2024. Venezuela, Hopeless Failed State. Introduction. Once Latin America's wealthiest country per capita, Venezuela has descended into a prolonged state of dysfunction that many now classify as irreversible collapse. The implosion of its political institutions, economy, and public services has rendered it a textbook example of a failed state. Under the leadership of Nicolás Maduro, and following the authoritarian trajectory established by Hugo Chavez, Venezuela has become a nation where state power exists largely to repress, extract, and survive, not to govern or serve. Authoritarianism and institutional decay. Venezuela's political system has become a hollowed-out authoritarian regime. Nicolás Maduro remains in power despite widespread allegations of electoral fraud and international condemnation. The judiciary is fully subordinated to the executive, while the legislature has been bypassed or restructured to eliminate opposition. State institutions operate not as mechanisms of governance, but as instruments of political control and corruption. Elections no longer offer a legitimate pathway to change. Opposition leaders have been jailed, exiled, or barred from participating. Civil society, once vibrant, is stifled by censorship, surveillance, and intimidation. The rule of law has collapsed, and arbitrary detentions, torture, and enforced disappearances are routinely documented by international human rights bodies. Economic collapse and hyperinflation. Venezuela's economy has contracted by more than 80% since 2013, one of the deepest peacetime recessions ever recorded. The country, once dependent on oil exports, has seen its production plummet due to mismanagement, corruption, and sanctions. Attempts to stabilize the currency have failed, and the bolivar has become practically worthless. Hyperinflation reached over 10 million% in 2019, and despite some moderation, inflation remains among the highest in the world. Dollarization has taken hold informally, but access to foreign currency is limited to elites and those receiving remittances. The majority of Venezuelans lack purchasing power and access to basic goods. Public employees, including teachers and doctors, earn salaries that do not cover daily food needs. Humanitarian catastrophe. The state has failed to provide essential services. Public hospitals lack medicine, electricity, and water. Malaria, measles, and tuberculosis have returned with force, and child malnutrition is at crisis levels. The education system is crumbling, and most schools operate sporadically, if at all. Water and electricity outages are frequent, affecting major cities and rural areas alike. Fuel shortages are endemic, despite Venezuela having the world's largest proven oil reserves. The collapse of infrastructure reflects a broader breakdown of state functionality. Mass exodus and regional impact. More than 7.7 million Venezuelans, a quarter of the population, have fled the country since 2015, marking one of the largest displacement crises in modern history. Neighboring countries such as Colombia, Peru, and Brazil have borne the brunt of the refugee influx, straining their own social systems. Those who remain inside Venezuela live under conditions of scarcity, repression, and despair. The emigration has also created a brain drain, further weakening any prospect of institutional or economic recovery. Most who leave are young, educated, or skilled professionals with no plans to return. Conclusion. Venezuela represents a tragic convergence of authoritarianism, economic collapse, and institutional failure. It is not merely a struggling state, but a failed one, incapable of fulfilling the most basic functions of governance. The political elite has insulated itself from accountability through repression and patronage, while the population endures hunger, illness, and displacement. International efforts at mediation have faltered, and sanctions have done little to dislodge the regime or alleviate human suffering. In its current state, Venezuela offers little hope for internal reform or democratic renewal. It is a failed state, not in transition, but seemingly entrenched in permanent crisis, a warning to the region and a burden to its people. References: 1. Organization of American States. Final Report on Electoral Integrity in Venezuela, 2021. 2. UN Human Rights Council. Report on Human Rights Violations in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, 2023. 3. International Monetary Fund. World Economic Outlook. Venezuela Country Report, 2024. 4. World Bank. Venezuela Macro Poverty Outlook, 2023. 5. Doctors Without Borders. Health System Collapse in Venezuela, 2022. 6. UNHCR and IOM. Venezuelan Refugee and Migrant Crisis Regional Overview, 2024. Zimbabwe. Descent into rampant hyperinflation, massive unemployment, and despair. By Aslan Adnan, published May 2025. Once hailed as the breadbasket of southern Africa, Zimbabwe has for decades been trapped in a cycle of economic mismanagement, authoritarian rule, and socio-political decay. Today, it stands as a stark example of a country brought to its knees by hyperinflation, mass unemployment, and a citizenry suffocating under the weight of failed leadership. An economy in freefall, again. Zimbabwe's economic decline is not new. Its first bout of hyperinflation in 2008 reached a staggering 89.7 sextillion%, leading to the abandonment of its national currency. While the reintroduction of the Zimbabwean dollar in 2019 was meant to signal recovery, it instead reignited financial instability. By 2024, inflation had again surged to triple digits, peaking at 1,400%, according to the Zimbabwe National Statistics Agency. Ordinary Zimbabweans now survive through barter, remittances from abroad, or the U.S. dollar, which circulates unofficially despite government efforts to enforce the failing local currency. The cost of bread or fuel can double within a week, and savings are meaningless in a monetary system devoid of trust. Corruption, excessive money printing, and misgovernance remain the core drivers of this dysfunction. Mass unemployment and lost hope. Zimbabwe's unemployment rate is estimated at over 85%, although exact figures are difficult to determine given the vast informal economy. Graduates drive taxis, teachers moonlight as street vendors, and skilled professionals have long since left for South Africa, the UK, or Australia. The public sector, once the largest employer, has all but collapsed. Civil servants go months without salaries, and hospitals and schools operate only sporadically. Infrastructure has crumbled, with power cuts and water shortages now part of daily life. Zimbabweans are not only jobless, they are voiceless in a system that no longer even pretends to serve them. Political paralysis and repression. Despite the 2017 military-assisted ousting of longtime ruler Robert Mugabe, the promised political renewal under President Emerson Mnangagwa has failed to materialize. The ruling ZANU-PF party retains its grip through electoral manipulation, intimidation, and silencing of opposition figures. The 2023 general elections were widely condemned as neither free nor fair. Opposition parties, particularly the Citizens Coalition for Change, CCC, face harassment, arrest, and restrictions on assembly. Journalists and activists endure constant surveillance and violence. For many Zimbabweans, the ballot box offers no hope, and the emigration queue seems the only remaining option. A humanitarian crisis in the making. As the economy collapses and governance fails, the humanitarian situation grows dire. Food insecurity affects over 5 million people. The UN World Food Programme has warned of deepening hunger, especially in drought-prone provinces such as Masvingo and Matabeleland. Agricultural output has plummeted due to erratic rains, lack of inputs, and land degradation. Health services are deteriorating rapidly. Hospitals are under-equipped. Doctors have fled the country or joined protests, and disease outbreaks, from cholera to typhoid, are increasingly common. Education is a luxury many families can no longer afford. Zimbabwe's youth, over 60% of the population, see no future in a country that has abandoned their potential. Conclusion. A nation in stasis. Zimbabwe is not at war, nor has it suffered a natural cataclysm, yet its people live as if in a disaster zone, victims of chronic political failure and economic decay. The international community's piecemeal engagement, cautious diplomacy, limited sanctions, and intermittent aid has done little to reverse the slide. The country's survival now hinges on two possibilities: either a complete political transformation led by internal reform and pressure from civil society, or an even deeper collapse into chronic poverty, mass emigration, and regional instability. As it stands, Zimbabwe remains a nation trapped in despair, rich in natural and human resources, yet shackled by corruption, repression, and a toxic legacy of misrule. References: 1. World Bank, Zimbabwe Economic Update, December 2024. 2. Zimbabwe National Statistics Agency, ZimStat, Inflation Reports, 2024 to 2025. 3. UN World Food Program, Zimbabwe Food Security Report, March 2025. 4. Human Rights Watch, Zimbabwe, Repression of Opposition and Civil Society, January 2025. 5. International Crisis Group, Zimbabwe, Beyond the Facade of Reform, 2024. A heartfelt light. To every soul whose hand did give, you've helped me dream, helped me live. In darkest hours your light came through, with hearts so kind, so pure, so true. Your gifts, like stars in deepest night, have steered me gently toward the light. Each coin, each word, each silent prayer, a thread of hope so rich, so rare. My eyes once dimmed now seek the skies, and slowly clearer visions rise. Because of you, I dare to see the world again, its grace, its plea. Your compassion's flame will not just stay with me alone. It lights the way for others wandering through despair to feel the warmth of selfless care. You've shown what love in action means, in quiet ways through giving scenes. You've built a bridge from soul to soul and made the broken feel more whole. So let this thanks rise like a song, a melody both soft and strong. May your example gently call more hearts to rise to give. To fall into the joy of lifting pain, of planting hope where none remains. Your kindness walks beside me still, a light, a love, a living will.
don't forget to hit that subscribe button to show your support.